Los Fresnos is in the deep South Texas, and from this house here, we're about 15 minutes away from the border as a crow flies. So that's how far south we are. I hope you're having a good Tuesday morning, and thanks for allowing me to spend some time with you today here on the Nature Coast channel. Today we're in Jonah 2. We've been making our way through the Bible at the table here in Los Fresnos. We've been making our way through the Bible in what we call the Bible binge. And it's a Bible reading plan where we just take little bits of a portion of a book, and we're reading through the entire Bible in 14 months. And then we've been spending some time in some of these books on Sundays, providing a window into some of these books, what they mean, how we're supposed to understand them, things that are talking to us today. And that's what we're going to do today. We've been in the book of Jonah, and today we're going to look at Jonah chapter 2, which is one of those chapters that we tend to, when it comes to Jonah, which Jonah is one of those popular stories that we find. In fact, you can walk into Walmart, I think, and buy a book on Jonah and the whale. It's one of those popular stories of the Bible. In fact, in the early church, it was the most popular Old Testament story outside of the Exodus. So it's a big deal. It's a big story. But Jonah 2 is the piece that we tend to just kind of skip over. And that's Jonah's prayer at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea now. To revisit, Jonah is running from God's presence. He's running away from the visible presence of God, which is the glory cloud in the temple. And he runs away from the presence only to find the presence with him on a boat in a storm. He ends up getting thrown overboard, and God prepares not only the storm, but a big fish to swallow Jonah. And that brings us to Jonah chapter 2. Jonah has a prayer inside the fish at the bottom of the Mediterranean. This prayer is loosely based on Psalm 18. In fact, if you read the prayer, you might think, oh, hey, this sounds like a song. Most of it is. He's reading or he's singing Psalm 18. He's thinking about Psalm 18 as he descends to the bottom of the Mediterranean. And at this point, he probably doesn't even know if he's going to live or not. But he sees in Psalm 18 his story and his life and his prayer. And so he begins praying. He finds in Psalm 18 the words that he needs. In fact, Psalm 18 was a song or poem that David wrote on the run from Absalom. And David's asking for rescue. Well, Jonah is asking for rescue from the big fish in the bottom of the Mediterranean. And at the end of it all, he says he longs for God's presence, the very thing he was running from. He longs to be in the temple. He longs to be in the visible presence of God. And as we said Sunday, that was his way of saying, Jesus, I need you now. There is a phrase, though, at the end of the prayer that I just thought, let's just take a little bit of time to think about this, because, again, we tend to just run right over it because it sounds so familiar to us. There is a line that ends his prayer in Jonah 2 that's also a line that ends in Psalm 3. Oh, Psalm 3 is where David is writing and he's on the run from Absalom. And David's appeal for rescue in Psalm 3 ends with this line. And it's this: salvation belongs to the Lord. That's it. Salvation belongs to the Lord, or Yahweh. That's God's personal name. Salvation belongs to God. Now, again, we're used to reading that as if it's just another, it's a tremendous line. And it's kind of a benediction for the Psalm 3. It's kind of a benediction for this prayer. And so we just kind of read it as a benediction. Yes, salvation, the only place we can find our salvation, the only place that we can find our deliverance, the only place that we can find our rescue is in God. And that's a great thought, by the way. There's nothing, in fact, that phrase is used throughout the Old Testament in some of those same ways, talking about how God is the only place for rescue. But here, if you read it, we're using the Christian Standard Bible here, so I've probably gamed it a little bit here. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Salvation or deliverance belongs to God. And so if the phrase belongs to, that's kind of what we're looking at here. Yes, God is the only source of salvation, but did you know that salvation itself belongs to God? He owns it. So here in Jonah, it's just more than God sourcing salvation, or that the only place we can find salvation is in God. And the reason this is big in Jonah is because of the way the whole book starts off. The whole book starts off with God telling Jonah, hey, take this message of salvation, take it to the Assyrians, take it to your enemies living in Nineveh. And so Jonah says no. That's how he's in this fish. Jonah says, no, I'm not going to do that for the enemies. Now, the popular take for Jonah not taking the message of salvation to the enemies is that he was afraid of the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were bad people. I mean, they were big and bad, and they were something to be afraid of. And that plays out in Israel's history, the way the Assyrians just basically ransacked the 10 northern tribes. They were known as a ferocious people. That's not why Jonah didn't want to take the message of salvation to Assyria. In fact, Jonah says this in chapter 4 in a conversation with God. He says this about why he said no the first time. I fled toward Tarsus, which is where Paul is from, by the way. I fled toward Tarshish in the first place because I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love, and one who relents from sending disaster. I knew you were going to give Nineveh salvation. I knew you were going to save Nineveh. I knew you're going to give your grace and forgiveness to those people. See, it's not about fearing for his life. He didn't go because he didn't want God's salvation, life, and forgiveness for the people of Nineveh, Israel's enemies. He didn't want God to give them his grace and salvation. See, Jonah thought he owned salvation. Salvation belonged to Jonah. That's his thinking when he says no. Jonah thought he could dictate who gets salvation and who doesn't. Salvation, Jonah found out, doesn't belong to Jonah. Doesn't belong to Israel. That's the other thing going on here. Now, Israel kind of kept a clamp on mission. You see a little bit of it in the Old Testament, but for the most part, you don't see a whole lot of missionary activity in Israel. Salvation doesn't belong to Israel. Salvation was found in Israel. It was the only place you could find it, but it didn't belong to Israel. It belonged to the Lord. It belonged to Yahweh. It belonged to God, the very one from whom Jonah is running. So God gives salvation to whoever he pleases, and it's not ours to dictate. In fact, the most popular verse that we know here in our American culture is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave. He loved the whole world that he gave. You see, salvation doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God, and he gives it to whoever he wants. Now, this phrase shows up again. It's being used in the book of Revelation, and it's part of a song that's being sung around the resurrected Jesus, and probably was part of a song that's being sung in the 7 churches to whom John is writing in Revelation. And here's a snippet of that song. I looked, there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one could number. And this is what they're singing. Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on his throne, and to the Lamb. So this is a reminder to those 7 churches in Revelation that they're having a hard time with all sorts of stuff. They're having a hard time with unbelief. They're having a hard time with rebellion and disobedience. They're having a hard time with a lack of care for others. There's a lot of dysfunction in those 7 churches. And so they're having to be reminded that salvation belongs to Jesus. Now, I spent this time unpacking this from Jonah because we do this. We do this all the time. Where we start to act like we own salvation. And that salvation, that we get to figure out who's going to get salvation and who isn't. Then I'm not going to get specific because it would really get messy if I started giving you examples of where I've seen this. But it's bad and it's rampant. Salvation isn't ours to withhold. Salvation isn't ours to figure out who's going to get it and who isn't. Salvation is not ours. It doesn't belong to us. We are not the gatekeepers. And wow, some people think that we're supposed to be the gatekeepers of no. The salvation belongs to God, and he gives it to whoever he pleases. God so loved the world. And by the way, just before that, he says the Spirit blows where he wills. And nobody knows where he comes and where he goes. That's John 3. This isn't ours. And so it's why we say at the table here in Los Fresnos, maximum word and sacrament for maximum people. Salvation's not ours. It's Jesus. So we strive to bring more Jesus to more people. Maximum Jesus to more people. Maximum Jesus to maximum people. Maximum word and sacrament to maximum people. Salvation is for everybody. And we don't dictate. And so we give salvation and that message generously because Jesus is generous with his salvation. Salvation belongs to our God. That's how Jonah ends his prayer. He gets it. It took him to get to be put at the bottom of the Mediterranean in a fish, in darkness, and all sorts of bad stuff going on there. But he gets it. Salvation isn't mine. It's not ours. It's Jesus. That is today's Rhythms of Grace. And I'm so thankful and delighted that you're allowing me to be a part of your channel here. And I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. I look forward to seeing what others are saying here on Rhythms of Grace. I've already enjoyed the ones that I've seen so far. This is great. I'm glad we're doing this. And if you have any questions, just leave them right here on this channel. And by the way, we're posting this on the Table's Face YouTube channel as well. But if you got a question, leave it in the comments and we'll get it answered, I promise you. So thanks for spending time with me, and just remember this throughout the day. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, Jesus is smiling on you. Jesus has you. Have a good day.